January 2023 garage update version 2, since I screwed up on the landscape of the prior video. I got a 40-gallon breeder from Petco, and I got a overflow box from BRS and drilled it with the kit that comes from BRS. Drilled the back and ended up going on YouTube and finding instructions for a custom wood stand, which actually was technically kind of a pain in the ass to build, but it turned out okay. I did add these cross braces that you'll see that in California I think are probably a good idea for shear strength because of the earthquakes. I'm not sure that this would stand up without those to an earthquake, so I added those, and otherwise the stand came out really good. And I moved a bunch of stuff over from a 20 gallons, so it's somewhat mature tank, but as you can see it's got a decent amount of algae growing, so it's in some initial phases. I've got some monopores that I'll be growing down along the bottom, and then I'm hoping to move a decent amount of SPS from my house tank out here. See how they do. I've got a couple of frags of SPS over here. They were touching each other, and so they were killing each other. So I had to frag a little bit of them, and I moved them over. So we'll see how those two SPS testers do. And if they do well, then I'll move some more SPS out here to the 40-gallon breeder. I've got the same LED Red Sea LED 50 lights that I've got in the house on my Reefer 425. Those are doing quite well. I like those lights. And I'm running all for reef on this tank. Since there's not too many corals yet, it's pretty easy to dose. I'm keeping my alk about 9.0. Alpha Reef ends up keeping the calcium about 420, magnesium about 1350, and super easy. I actually don't have to adjust the doser very often. Then this is my 10-gallon quarantine tank. Now this tank is plumbed with the 40-gallon breeder, and they are plumbed together, and they share a sump down here normally, and then that keeps both the 40-gallon breeder and the 10-gallon as a nice mature tanks. I will eventually change the 10-gallon into a 20-gallon long, since I think that'll be better for a quarantine tank. But for now, I broke my 20-gallon tank, so I've got to make a new one. So I got a couple of Springer damsels today, and so what I did is I turned off the return flow that is actually hooked up to my UV sterilizer. So there's no return flow currently. So this tank is now isolated. There is no return flow. I've got an ATO that I got from Tunzi. So a Tunzi ATO, as well as I also have a Tunzi protein skimmer and a in-tank filter that I don't currently have set up. My plan is, if these fish do well over the next several weeks and there doesn't seem to be any disease, then I'll probably go ahead and move them over to the 40-gallon breeder. And that way, if they do look diseased over the next several weeks, then I won't. If they die, then I'll leave this tank fallow for at least a couple of 2 or 3 months before I reconnect the flow, so that the flow between the 10-gallon tank and the 40 breeder and the sump are all connected again. But for now, this tank is isolated, and we'll see how these two fish do in this tank. I think this works better because I think fish do tend to do better in a mature tank. A lot of people set up quarantine tanks in very immature tanks that don't have any live rock, no live sand. It's just a tank with a hang on the back filter, and a lot of the fish don't do well. I think the fish tend to do better in mature tanks. So I like to keep the tank with live rock, live sand, keep it connected to a larger system, and then when I am quarantining, then I go ahead and isolate this tank until I'm sure that the fish are doing well. And then as long as they do well, I'll reconnect all the plumbing together and keep this tank nice and mature for the next time that I quarantine. And I've done this several times so far, and so far so well. Of course, I haven't had any diseases yet, but it's going to happen. And that's my setup in the garage. It's been a lot of fun building a custom tank and drilling tanks. So give it a try.